we're back for another interview, and very privileged, very honoured today to have the wonderful Charlie Morgan with us all the way from Nashville. So, Charlie, thanks very much for doing this. Really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to talk to anybody.
That's lockdown for you, isn't it? You know, it's. But there you go. Things hopefully lifting and getting a bit more pleasant for everybody. So yeah, once again, really appreciate it. Now, I guess the place to start is at the beginning. Where did the passion for drums come from for you?
Actually, well, if you want to go back that far, I think I was living in Switzerland at the time. My father was an advertising executive, and he got a gig with American company in Geneva, Switzerland, and we lived there for almost 3 years, between the age of 11 and 14. And I had a friend at school, a Swiss French friend at school, who had a band, and he had a drum kit in his basement. And but he wanted me to go and create lyric maps for him in phonetically translated, so that he could pronounce the stuff with an American accent or British accent, as opposed to a French accent. So I was writing this stuff down in phonetic alphabet, for him. And we had this drum kit in the corner of his basement, and one day when I was about 14, I got on the kit and started playing a rhythm. And he turned to me, he said, how long did it take you to get that? And I said, I don't know, I'm just playing what Ringo plays. I just looked at Ringo, and I'm playing what he plays. He said, that took me about 6 months, he said, to get the simplest beat. He said, it took me 6 months to get my independence for that. And I said, well, it seems quite easy to me. And it did seem quite easy. Obviously I was 14, and you're learning stuff at such a rate at the age of 14. Then I thought no more of it, and I came back to England, and I was at school, and a friend of mine who actually had learned cello, his dad played cello for the Beatles, and his uncle played viola, and he'd learned cello, and he was playing guitar now. And I'd known him since we were about 6 or 7. He came to me one day and he said, "Yeah, I'm starting a band. Do you know anyone who will play drums in school?" And I just said, "I'll do it." And I got myself a gigster. I got a bass drum, a snare drum, and a hi-hat from the local corner store. And I painted it purple. I remember that.
As you do.
I don't know why, but it was, and that's what I started on in his garage, literally in his garage. And, but I think of that band, I was the only person that ended up turning pro. And I had no thoughts about it, even right the way up to almost leaving school. I was going to be a marine biologist. I was studying all the sciences, and I was going to be a marine biologist. That was my passion. And but my last term at school, I started playing in the pubs 3 or 4 nights a week with different bands, and I actually got halfway through the last term, and the headmaster called me in and said he felt that my extracurricular activities, that's what he called them, were getting in the way of my schoolwork. And I kind of begged to differ. I told him that I felt that my schoolwork was actually getting in the way of this. And we agreed to go our separate ways. And I left before the final exams. I left before my A-levels.
Brilliant.
Hit the road with a band in Germany 2 months later.
So when was your first, obviously that's a professional gig, I appreciate that. When did things start to, really snowball for you?
Well, I joined this band called Renegade Jones in 1973. And as I said, we went to Germany and we toured all over the UK. We had a big old comma truck that we built a bulkhead in. All the gear was behind the bulkhead, and we had 4 bunks in the comma truck, and we were going out doing gigs for like 50 quid a gig, but we somehow were doing enough gigs a week to make enough money for us to all get like 20 quid in our pockets clear at the end of the week. And we were making a living. And then, of course, gas prices in 1974 rocketed upwards, and suddenly we weren't making a living, and we all went our separate ways. But and then I was still playing in all, pub. Mid 70s was pub rock. It was. I was playing in different pub bands and regularly, but I had to kind of supplement my income during that time, because I really wasn't making more than about 10 or 15 quid a night, which you could buy a few drinks and packet of fags and things. I did smoke in those days. But so I started doing day jobs. I had various day jobs, and one of them was driving an air freight truck at Heathrow.
All right.
Because I could start at 4 in the morning and I could finish at 4 in the evening, get home, have a shower, change, throw my drums in the back of the car and drive off and do a gig, from 9 p.m. to 11. And I get home at midnight. And I was surviving on less than 4 hours sleep a night. And then Sunday I'd sleep all day, but I was doing that, in the mid 70s. I was supplementing my income by earning a living as a truck driver, and playing probably Thursday, Friday, Saturday, maybe sometimes Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, in pubs, and then just literally, Sunday I'd sleep all day.
Try and catch up a little bit.
Yeah.
Oh, dear me. So once, obviously, you've played with some incredible names over the years. I've been on your website actually having a look this week, and the discography is just incredible. Now, who was the first big name that you came into contact with?
I think that was Kate Bush, and the reason that happened was I was part of a band that had signed up to a record label in the mid 70s, and we were signed up, and we ended up having no success whatsoever. But it turned out the guitarist and the bass player ended up in Kate Bush's band. In fact, the bass player was Del, who ended up with Kate's Del Palmer. Yeah, and we've been friends since 1975. And he called me. This is quite funny because he called me to do some work with Kate, and I went and met Kate, and she was still under her development deal, and the first album hadn't come out, and I heard her stuff and I thought, wow, this is amazing. But at the time I was signed to a band called Alibi, which was being produced by Muff Winwood, who was managing Island Studios, the Basing Street just off Portobello Road. And I was there doing this album on Dead Time with Muff Winwood producing it. And so I turned her down. And then our deal fell through with the band, because Muff was doing several bands on Dead Time. And actually one of the bands that was there at the same time as us, and we would bump into all the time, was Dire Straits, and they were doing the very first album, which Muff managed to get signed to, was it Polygram? I can't remember now who they signed to.
Couldn't tell you, I'm not
sure. Anyway, they got signed, we didn't. Yeah. And the band Alibi kind of, it fell through. We were doing stuff still occasionally, doing tracks in the late 70s. But then Kate got her first success, and I got a phone call, a panic phone call. I remember I was sitting at home, got a phone call from Del. He said, Charlie, can you come with us to Cologne and do a TV show tomorrow? And I said, what's going on? He said, well, our drummer can't leave the country because he's got work permit problems, because apparently he was from Brazil, this guy. I think his name was Sergio. But so I said, yeah, okay. And he said, well, okay, all right, I'm going to send you a cassette of the songs we're going to do, because in those days, and I think he sent it by bike. Somebody from EMI sent it, and so I learned. And I remember we went over and it was a TV show called Bio's Bahnhof, which was actually in a big old railway. It was in a railway turn turntable kind of marshalling shed.
Hmm.
And they actually wheeled us on a truck and wheeled us back off. I mean, they were using these trucks as stages.
Brilliant.
It was a really good place, actually, really, really good gig. And we did 2 songs there, all live. And then I thought no more of it. And but later in 1978, I kind of officially joined the Kate Bush Band.
Hmm.
And then actually, it kind of got political because the producer wanted to use his band. And actually, all of those guys in that band are people I've worked with since. The band was basically the Alan Parsons Project band.
Okay.
And it was David Payton on bass and Ian Benson on guitar. David Payton and I worked together many years with Elton. And Stuart Elliott on drums. And Stuart and I are old buddies. We're very old buddies now. And we actually traded a lot of gigs during that time. But I remember we were doing the Lionheart album, and it kind of got political. And we ended up doing all the demos. And then we did about half a dozen tracks down in the south of France. And then we left. And the producer brought his boys in. And they basically replaced all our tracks, but 2. And we ended up on 2 tracks on that album. I wasn't terribly happy about that, so I left the band. And I did an audition for the Tom Robinson Band and got the gig. So I was in the second lineup of the TRB.
Superb.
And that was probably my first major tour. So meeting Kate was the first major thing, but the next thing that happened was the Tom Robinson Band, and I toured the UK, Europe, and then the United States and all of North America, all the way across 1979 until the band kind of dissolved. And then I did some solo stuff for Tom. So I'd say the Tom Robinson Band was my first real experience of a major act.
They were massive, weren't they, at the time?
Yeah, I mean, we did in the summer of '79. Well, we did a UK tour early in '79, around Easter time. That was, that was the traditional time. You get after Christmas, and then people would come into the Easter period for the first tours, and then the second set of tours would either be midsummer, where you do festivals, or you'd end up doing an autumn tour. You'd start in September and work your way through to October, November.
Yeah.
The TRB, we toured the UK earlier that year, and then in the summer, early summer, we did a number of these were great gigs as well. We did a number of live festivals in Europe, and this is the lineup. So they'd have a local band on first, then the Tom Robinson Band, then Talking Heads. Then Dire Straits, and at the very end, for the Midnight Maniacs, it was Rory Gallagher.
Oh wow!
So that was what we toured with,
yeah.
And you can imagine, being with all that bunch of people. I mean, being with Talking Heads, the original lineup of Talking Heads, and Dire Straits. It was a blast, and we did the whole of the summer in Europe, and then we started in the autumn in North America, and we did this massive tour of North America, and it was just a massive eye-opener for me. It was a huge thing. It was my first real proper tour. We were staying in Ramada Inns and Holiday Inns, and
pinch yourself moment.
Oh yeah, it was. I mean, it was brilliant. It was great, and Tom was one of the best bosses I ever had. He paid us really well.
Yeah.
Plus, we could sign for everything. Everything was signed on a tab, and we got per diems. But it was brilliant. It was a land of milk and honey.
Oh, absolutely! It's just an incredible story. I mean, as I said already, your back catalogue is it's endless. It really is. It goes on and on. So, obviously you've played for some huge names. I'm looking here. I've got Elton John, obviously, Barry Manilow, Pavarotti.
I
So
mean, the Pavarotti thing is we did a big duet with Elton and Luciano, which is the duet of Live Like Horses for the, actually the last album I did with Elton in 1997. The 97 album. So that was really, that was, we did that song, Live Like Horses, and Pavarotti came and did that. And he came to a gig that we did in Bologna, I think, before that.
How was it working, you know, perhaps indirectly maybe, but how was that? I mean, what was he like? What was Luciano like?
Oh, definitely larger than life.
Mm.
You know, when we met him in Bologna, you know, he went up to Elton and gave him a huge, great kiss on both cheeks and said, "Maestro."
The ultimate in respect, eh?
Yeah, it was. It was definite mutual respect because Elton was kind of bowing to him, and they were in the dressing room just before we went on stage, and it was just like one of those moments where you think, okay, all right, I'm sitting here watching this going on.
It's fascinating. How did the Elton gig come about for you, Charlie?
Well, and that's interesting in itself. And I spoke to someone else about this. By 1985, I was really well established as one of the top session players in the UK. I mean, I'd gone through a whole kind of development period out of the Tom Robinson band, started working with Judy Zook. I did a couple of tours with her in 80, 81. And then I was building up my resume, doing a lot of, I actually got into working a lot with Jeff Wayne Music, who did a lot of jingles. Mm-hmm. And a lot of jingles, and also working for Jeff Wayne himself, I did a number of theme tunes for him. Like the theme tune for, hang on, so Grandstand was the BBC. What was the ITV one?
Oh, dear me.
What was it?
The Saturday afternoon one, was it?
Yeah, was it World of Sport or something like that? Or
it could have been World of Sport, actually, yes.
World of Sport. I did the theme tune for that. And I also started working on his next musical, because he'd done the War of the Worlds musical. I started working on stuff for his next musical. But I was doing a lot of jingles. I was doing a lot of sessions for people and a lot of songwriting sessions. And then I kind of you know, in those days, you'd do the 8-track and 16-track demo sessions for songwriters. And then you'd graduate to doing master sessions on 24-track. And, you know, still it was all analog. Mm-hmm. But during that time, I'd done several albums with a sound engineer called Julian Mendelsohn. Really lovely, extremely laconic sense of humor. Great, typical Australian sarcasm. And just the sweetest guy. And actually, he and I have re-established contact recently. He's in Melbourne. And we've had a couple of Google FaceTime meetings because he wants me to do a project for him, long distance. Yeah. But he and another guy I was working with, Steve James, who was actually Sid James's son, sound engineer, who engineered the Ruttles albums, amongst other things. He also lives in Australia, and we've been friends since the mid-70s. But I was doing a lot of sessions for both of these people. And Julian phoned me up and said, "Ian, mate, I'm doing this album with Peter Collins producing for this brilliant singer, but the guy's doing everything programmed, and it just doesn't sound right. It's kind of sounding stodgy." And he said, "I know you can inject something to it." And I went and did a session for this guy, and this guy was Nick Kershaw.
Oh, right. We
did 2 songs for Nick Kershaw, and I made them sound better. And then I got brought in to do the rest of the album. So moving on, this is about 83, 84. I started working for Peter Collins, and I did the Gary Moore, Phil Lynott stuff, you know, out in the fields. That was Peter Collins. I did Tracy Ullman, They Don't Know About Us. And then I started working on that album. And during that time, in the early 80s, I'd also been working a lot with Kirsty MacColl, who actually wrote They Don't Know About Us. Yeah. I was kind of officially in her band with guys from the Blockheads, actually. We have Mickey Gallagher and Norman Watroy, and I was working with them as well. So I was doing a lot of freelance work. But moving on to early 85, I mean, I was basically doing 80 or 90 hours of sessions a week. I mean, literally,
Wow.
well, Dave Mattox and I were doing a lot of work together. And I got a phone call to do some sessions. And I was told I'd be there for 3 days and I'd be doing maybe 3 or 4 tracks. I wasn't told who it was for. But I just got this phone call. Now, what had happened was Elton was doing his album, the Ice on Fire album. And he had got Nick Kershaw and George Michael in to do some guitar and backup vocals on that song, Nikita.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Dave Mattox played on that. Dave Mattox and Dave Payton played
Great song.
that rhythm section. And it's one of those ultimate groove songs. It's like Dave's ridiculous pocket groove, you know, and David Payton playing bass as well.
That fretless bass was on that. Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fabulous work on that. But he was doing this album, the Ice on Fire album, with various different rhythm sections. In fact, I think he used Queen's rhythm section for a couple of tracks. He used Roger Taylor and John Deacon. But anyway, so during the Nikita tracking, he said, I really love that album that you brought out. It was the Human Racing album. He said, so who's your drummer? And Nick said, oh, it's a guy called Charlie Morgan that my producer, Peter Collins, is using on all kinds of things, you know. Matt Bianco, I worked with Peter Collins on Matt Bianco as well. Sure. You know, so I was his go-to guy by that time. And that had happened in 84. So Elton said to Gus Dudgeon, I want this bloke on I wanted to play on my album. And so I turned up the Tuesday after Easter 1985 to the Mill Studios, or it was called The Soul then. It was it was Gus's studio originally, but he'd lost it through accountancy mismanagement, should we say. But we were working there anyway. And I turned up at the studio, and that's when I found out it was Elton. I mean, literally, I brought my stuff in and got all set up, and we did 3 tracks on the Ice on Fire album for Elton. And during those sessions, he said to me, I'm doing this little show at Wembley for Bob Geldof and mid-year. I don't suppose you'd consider coming and doing it. It's like a 45-minute set, and we'll have George Michael on it and Kiki D, and we're going to have a few guest artists. But I'm putting a band together, and we'll be rehearsing the week before. I said, sure, that sounds like a lot of fun. And that was Live Aid.
Of course. Wow. What are your memories of Live Aid? Is it? I mean, I was talking to Steve White about this, and he says even now it's still fresh in the memory. And
yeah, I mean, it pretty much imprinted on my mind. And actually, because I realized as we were getting close to it, I realized it was a big deal. I went and bought myself a self-focusing, self-rewinding 35mm camera. So we didn't have digital cameras in those days, but it was a 35mm camera that I could just point and fire. And I thought, I've got to do this because I'm going to have to immortalize this whole thing. It's funny because I met so many people that I knew. I mean, obviously, Nick Kershaw was there. Howard Jones was there. Tracy Ullman was there. And, all those people I'd worked with. And the previous year, I'd been working with Roger Daltrey on his solo album and doing a bunch of TV shows. I remember I've got a picture somewhere of Roger as he came round the corner backstage, and I'm standing there, and he went, Charlie, what the fuck are you doing here? And I've actually got the moment where he went, what the fuck are you? I clicked at the camera. Because, of course, the Who were there, and
everyone was there.
And Elton and I stood on the side of the stage watching Queen's performance. So that's why I've got a bit of an issue with Bohemian Rhapsody, because we weren't there. they reconstruct it. They show the side of the stage, and there's no one there. And there should be Elton and Charlie, because we were there on the side of the whole of the gig.
Yeah.
We watched the whole set. Because Elton turned to me halfway and said, "Freddie's on fire tonight." And I said, "Yeah, I know." And we had to follow that.
Yeah. Because was it "I'm Still Standing" you started with? I can't remember.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I've got.
We did.
I remember that. I remember watching it. I'll be honest with you. Live Aid was my reason for picking up drumsticks. Simple as that. I remember watching it. I was on holiday with my family, and I didn't leave. the chalet in Butlins or wherever it was for the whole of the. And I remember my mother going, "No, you got it." And I was just fascinated. But I remember Elton came on, and I remember the appalling feedback through the first song. It was just like, oh, you know.
Yeah, and Elton had no monitors, and I had no monitors.
Oh.
But luckily, I could see his foot. And Elton's a big foot stamper. He stamps in time.
Yeah.
His left foot. And I was watching his left foot going, and I'm following his. I'm looking over my drum kit, following his left foot. And then we did. I think the next song we did was Benny and the Jets. And you know, there's a line in that. It's the second line of the song. Says the spotlight's hitting something that's been known to change the weather.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you remember, but it was a blisteringly hot day.
Yeah.
And people up in the front were actually passing out. They were hosing people down, and they were lifting girls up and carrying them to the side so that St. John ambulance people could revive them. Because the people were passing out, and they were going, "Someone else has passed out," and lifting them over the, you know, the poor people. They were just dying of heat, which is very unusual at Wembley, but you know. And then literally the opening bars of Benny and the Jets, when he sang that, the heavens opened above us. And I remember Elton, at some point, he pointed up saying, "The spotlight's hitting something that's been known to change the weather." And everybody in the audience was going, "Yeah," you know, it was like, it was one of those moments.
Oh. But it must have. I mean, to be. I mean, it's a huge part of history of music now, isn't it? That you know, it's there forever. I mean, most people have got the DVD, and to have been part of that must be. Well, I can't imagine.
It was pretty amazing, and I mean, we went to the after show party. I was standing on the side when they did the big mass photograph of everybody with all of the guys from Spandau Ballet, all the Who, you know. David Bowie, Elton, George Michael, you know, I mean, all of these people all just standing there in a room behind Wembley Stadium, you know, backstage. And then we went to the after show, you know, the after party, and hung out with them. And I remember getting in this horrible traffic jam, leaving the place, you know. Elton had a compound in the car park at Wembley Stadium. He'd brought in an RV, and he had a compound with security guards and fences, and people were dropping in and saying hello and having a drink and going off, you know. So, and you know, because these were in the bad old days, these were in the drinks and drug days. So
yeah, of course.
You know, there was plenty of that around before we even went on stage.
We didn't.
But I remember his caravan was parked in a compound backstage, kind of cordoned off.
Amazing.
Yeah, I suppose I should publish a few photographs. I should.
Yeah. Oh, you know, these are things that, I mean, we never get to see what goes on, us regular beings, what goes on backstage, and I find it fascinating. I really do. So obviously that was the start of quite a long relationship with Elton, wasn't it? It was you with him.
Yeah, I mean, we came off stage after our 45-minute set. And as we were walking off stage, Elton was walking along with John Reed, his manager. And I remember him jerking his thumb back and said, "Let's put this show on the road." And then I got the phone call, and the first 2 years, and I was in the band, I was on a salary. You know, and I was still doing sessions when we weren't touring, but we did that first tour started in autumn of '85 and ended with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra concerts for the last 2 months of 1986. leading up to the 15th of December. I think that was the last show we did in Sydney.
Incredible.
We had a six-week tour at the end of, that was with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, and we were flying around Australia with a 92-piece orchestra.
Dream job.
That was another trendsetter. It was one of those things. Nobody had really done that with a full-size orchestra before.
Charlie, are you a reader, or are you?
Yeah.
You are a reader.
Yeah, I do read. Well, I learnt piano, a little bit of piano, in the early days, and then I kind of taught myself drum music. I understood the lengths of the notes. So,
of course, yeah.
So I did quite a lot of reading stuff. I mean, one of the things in the mid-70s, I cut my teeth on doing these BBC sessions for BBC Radio 2. We would do 6 songs, and the band was basically full rhythm section, sometimes with 2 guitarists. So it was like guitar, bass, drums, maybe a second guitarist, keyboard player, 4 brass, and 12 strings.
Right, yeah.
So it was over 20-piece band.
Yeah.
And we would do these tracks, these kind of light rock tracks. We do 6 in a session. These were weird sessions because we would start at 9:30 and there was a half-hour break in the middle, but we'd finish at 1. So it was like a standard 10 till 1, but there was a half-hour break where we go to the canteen. And it was for You, the Night and the Music. Do you remember that radio show that they used to do?
Ooh, I'm not sure.
It was on late at night, and these were all pop standards that were they were softened for Radio 2.
Yes.
This was the Musicians Union's requirement for what they called needle time. So they had to use like a 20-piece band or more, because then they got that many man hours of needle time for Radio 1.
Right, I see.
The Musicians Union required them to do these sessions, and we'd record these songs. The thing about it is that this stuff was edge of the seat session work, because we do 6 songs in one session with a 20-piece band, all straight down to half-inch 2-track in the corner. No multi-track.
Yeah. Went
straight to half-inch 2-track. So it was one of those things where I learned not to stick my neck out too far.
Yeah.
And we'd get into the session and I'd open up the chart, and normally there were like 5 or 6 sheets, open up the chart, and I'd start to speed read and go, okay, I know that one. Oh, big drum fill, all right, okay. And we'd start to, so you got to kind of pre-read the chart, but then you were getting drum sounds while you were running the first song, and they were quite often running it with the light on.
Oh,
and if everything went okay,
the take,
that they would say, anyone got any confessions to make? And you're kind of going, because if you said, I think the drummer needs to do another one, 20 pairs of eyes would be looking over their charts at you.
Yeah.
So it was very important not to fuck up, not to make any mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I got pretty good at kind of speed reading stuff and pulling charts out. And actually the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra stuff that we did, the arrangements, they were Paul Buckmaster arrangements, a lot of them. But James Newton Howard took them and augmented them to full-size orchestra.
Okay.
So he took Paul's original arrangements, and then he'd done a number of arrangements, I think on Too Low for Zero. I think he played various albums he played keyboards on and did some string arrangements on. So he had done, so they basically took all the orchestral stuff and they expanded them for a 90-piece orchestra. And when we got to Brisbane, 2 days before the first show, we had 2 days of rehearsals. We'd been doing quite a lot of the stuff in the rock set, but it was totally different with the orchestra.
Yeah.
And I remember that I was handed a beautifully copied chart to work with for all of the songs for the orchestral set. And I made good use of them,
Yeah.
They wanted us to kind of learn them by Elton wasn't terribly keen on us all standing there with charts. So I think I was, the first two gigs we did, I was kind of leaning over and looking at the chart, which was down next to me. But by that time I knew the songs well enough. And, by the time we got back to Sydney, at the end of the 26 dates, there were no charts in
Yeah.
sight for us.
Yeah, of course. Ah, fantastic. Well, look, you were a big part of my teenage years, indirectly, and I want to bring up the bill. Because, right, I loved I still do. I loved it as a teenager, and you were heavily involved in the writing of that with Andy Pask, weren't you?
Yeah, we were very lucky. We'd done a lot of library music for KPM Music Library, which was an affiliate of EMI.
Mm.
And they said, well, you're a rhythm section that works together well. Why don't you do an album of kind of rhythm section stuff? And we did 6 songs, I think it was, the 6 tracks, which was half of a library album that then, you know, ended up in the KPM Music Library.
Mm-hmm.
It was in the early 80s, like 84, 83, 84, I think we were doing this. We did 6 tracks, and they paid for it all. And we were on a 50-50 split with each other, and then with 50-50 split with KPM.
Yeah. And
it got picked up by this kind of off-the-wall police series that was on, I don't know if you remember, but the very first 13-part serialization was just once a week, late at night.
I don't remember the first. No, I remember it being on at 8 o'clock or whenever.
Well, they got to prime time after they did 2 series. They did 2 seasons, as they call them here, and they were on late at night, just like Monty Python's was on the BBC late at night originally, and then it went to a prime time slot. And then we got this announcement that they got an announcement that they were going to a twice a week, Tuesday and Thursday slot at 8 p.m. And could we rearrange the music? Because I can't remember what the original music was called, but it had a silly title, you know. They wanted us to rearrange it and put some lead lines on it. And actually, Andy had a great idea that we were going to get a friend in. Phil Todd had an EWI, you know, the electronic wind instrument, the electronic version of the saxophone.
Yeah.
And that theme tune became the very first theme tune in England ever to have EWI on it.
Aha, right, okay.
You know, Tom Scott was using it with the LA Express quite a lot. And so Phil Todd had this EWI, and Andy wrote a kind of chart out for him for the lead line that he had an idea for. And you know, to be quite honest, Andy pretty well got that idea for the original theme. And so we went in and re-recorded the whole tune, and it became the Bill theme tune. And I'll have to look at my PRS now, because they've still got the original title, but this was retitled as the Bill theme tune.
Yeah. And
then we still carried on getting the same amount of money, but the same percentage. But yeah, it paid my mortgage for a while, you know. It was never 25 years.
It's a great bit. I mean, it's such at the time when I remember watching it, I remember thinking, this is a great thing to play along with. And it's such a drummer's piece of music, isn't it? You know, especially the way it finishes.
Yeah.
Did you have quite an input in that?
Certainly rhythmically, yes.
Yeah.
And you know, it was, I think we were messing around with a sequence that I'd built that was in 7/4, but it was basically, it was really nothing more than a bar of 3 with a skip in it, followed by a bar of 4.
Yeah.
That's you know, and it kind of rolled quite easily. It wasn't a very difficult 7/4. Yeah. You know, and that was the basis for the tune.
Because I always thought it feels like a 7, doesn't it? Obviously, until you see it written down. It's
7/4. It goes to 4/4 in the core, in the second, in the B section, if you like. But it was in 7/4, and then when they did a rearrangement of it, they did a rearrangement, like a disco rearrangement, in 4/4. But Andy and I were horrified. And they said, "Don't worry, you're still going to get the same royalties for it." And we went, oh, "All right, whatever," you know.
So that you know, it's a big part of my teenagers. And the second part of you shaping me, if you like, was your involvement at the time with Premier. Now, as far as I'm concerned, some of the finest drums that have ever been made and will ever be made is the Signia. I've had 3 Signia kits and I've loved every single one. How were you heavily involved in the development for the Signia?
Yeah, I was employed. I was paid by them to go up to meetings and offer my my input. And in fact, we flew to New York and met up with a bunch of US endorsees to discuss what they wanted out of this new drum kit. And originally, the Signia drum kit, there were a couple of prototypes, and I'd love to know where they are. There were a couple of prototypes that had no expense spared, absolutely no expense spared, but we knew that they were going to be way too expensive to make. But one of the ideas we wanted to do, well, Joe Franco from Twisted Sister was a Premier endorsee, and he wanted the shells to all be slightly undersized, 4 millimeters undersized, so that the actual crown of the head would float.
Yes, understand that.
So he wanted that, a bit like Gretsch, basically. They made the slightly undersized shells so that the head, if you like, the actual rim of the head never touched.
Yeah.
There was a gap all the way around.
Was floating almost, yeah.
What's that? Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the first thing we did. And the other thing we wanted to try and do, we were working on as much as possible and isolating the shell from the 2 heads. So that they weren't, so that the lugs weren't too, that they didn't interrupt the actual resonance of the head.
Yeah.
And we even spoke to people at Brighton University, at their Science Institute, about the ideal depth for heads, for toms, and the actual, the best pitches for each tom size as well, optimum pitches. I mean, we worked really heavily with them. And then we brought it back to a situation where Premier were able to actually physically make it. And this is all around like 1989, 1990, 91.
Yeah.
And the first Signia rolled off the production line in 92. And in fact, I got the very first Signia off the production line, which was the Versace.
Oh, wait, that was the first one. Right, okay.
They phoned me, and we were about to start another tour with Elton in 92. Elton had been in and out of rehab and come clean and wanted to go on the road. And this is how the story goes with the Versace kit. Premier phoned me and said, look, we're going to start production, and you get the very first one off the production line. What do you want? What color do you want it? So I phoned up Elton's office and said, what color do we want this kit? And my fax machine, in those days, we all had fax machines. My fax machine started to go, and I noticed that it was from somewhere in Milan, in Italy. And it started reeling out these complicated drawings and designs. And I actually took a photocopy of these. I've got a photocopy of Gianni Versace's original scribbles. And it said, you know, it wanted black and white vertical stripes with gold hardware. And he wanted a specific number of stripes for each drum. So he even said the percentage of stripes changes, so the width of the stripes changes. And I took this to Premier and gave it to them and said, look, this is what Gianni Versace wants. And they said, really? Okay, all right, we'll do this. And I remember I went and picked up the kit on Good Friday, 1992. My drum tech and I drove up to Leicester and we picked it up. And we got there and saw it coming off the production line and being finished. And all the crew there was saying, you know what? Yeah, I wasn't too sure about this at first, but it actually looks pretty good. And that's the Versace kit.
It's an iconic looking kit. It really is.
Yeah.
Was it wrapped, Charlie, or was it?
No, it's actually painted.
Was it really? Wow.
And I think they did the black. They did the black first, and then they screened it all off. They taped it off, and then they did the white on top. So I believe the white is overlaid on top of the black.
All hand finished. Amazing. I mean, great sounding. I mean, you must have been thrilled with the outcome because they're fabulous sounding drums, really.
They are, and I mean, those my original ones were the ones with all the glue rings on the top and bottom.
Yeah.
But the later ones, they actually managed to do with one more ply. And Premier were developing that flush ply. I don't know if you remember.
Yes, I do.
They weren't overlapping. They were developing a flush ply where it actually, each shell was flush, and then they glued it, and then they set it, and then they chopped it off at each end. But it was done at a slight angle so that the seam ran diagonally across the actual depth of the drum.
Yeah, yeah.
So it didn't start and finish at the same place, because then it made it stronger. But and then they put the glue rings in. But later on, they made them without the glue rings. And I think I've got a 75th anniversary kit which doesn't have the glue rings in it.
You don't have the Versace kit anymore, then, I'm assuming.
Oh yeah, I do.
Oh, you've still got it. Oh, mate. Oh, I'm really glad to hear that. Really.
In the corner of my basement over there, and I use it. There's this bloke I do Elton tribute shows with, and I've been putting it in the back of the car, and I built myself a platform that hinges.
Yeah.
So I can put the rack on it. I've got the original rack that my drum tech and I built, because it was a kind of very industrial rack, if you remember. It was kind of, it was grey gas piping.
I had the poster of the kit on my wall for I probably still got it somewhere, I'll be honest. Amazing.
Yeah, we ended up with 2 racks, and the kit was going back and forth. The drums were going back and forth across the Atlantic, but one rack was being kept in America and one rack was over in the UK.
This is
it was all galvanized, you know, it's like silver galvanized.
Yeah.
Because Gianni Versace's set was all kind of silver and black and gold and white.
All very themed.
But yeah, I mean, I love that kit. I play it now every time I go and do one of these Elton tribute gigs with this bloke. I go there, and it's a bit of a schlep to drag it out of the car. It barely gets in my car. You know, I made sure I get it in the car. We actually did, just before the lockdown, we did a whole bunch of gigs. We did 10 gigs in 14 days in Florida, just to open up this whole Elton tribute concept.
Yeah. And
it went down really well. And I drove down to Florida. It was a 10-hour drive. I drove down there and met these guys, because they're from South Carolina. And we did the 10 shows, and I drove back. It was in February, before the lockdown.
The crowd must have enjoyed seeing that kit, because it's iconic, isn't it? It really
is. And a number of them are kind of nerdy enough to know that was the kit, you know. And the guy that does Elton kind of gives me a name check at the end and says, you know, I'm kind of the ringer in the band. But every time I got behind that kit to start playing it, it just felt like home. Everything was everything was there. It was all still in, you know, the 4 toms, 10, 12, 14, 16, no floor tom, all mounted.
Yeah.
22-inch bass drum with a double kick pedal, and then a second snare, the piccolo snare on the left. And actually, the hi-hat pedal and the bass drum pedal were Axis pedals.
Okay, yeah.
And the hi-hat doesn't have a tripod. It's got a bass, and then the hi-hat itself is clamped to the rack.
Okay.
With a multi-clamp.
Yeah.
So you have to put the hi-hat in and kind of screw it up, and it holds it at an angle.
Okay, all right, okay.
An angle that's really easy to play, because it comes in, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I've got long legs, you know, so setting up a hi-hat that sits vertically can be a bit of either I've got to set it up too close for my foot, or if it's ideal for my foot, then I'm playing too far away.
Yeah.
And the great thing about this hi-hat was we could bend it in and put it exactly where it needed to be, and the bass could be where it wanted to be. So my legs would be stretched out, but I'm playing right here. You know, it's really nice.
And it's never going to move.
It's never going, not a millimeter.
No.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, it brings back some great memories of you know, my kind of teenage years. And I say I don't think there's some great drums around, but definitely some of the finest sounding and looking drums I think I've
the Signia and Janista ranges were really good drums because they'd had drummers involved in the development.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I think Premiere did that totally correctly. I think they were absolutely right on the money as far as what they planned to do. Bring a drummer in, and I mean, I was also using notes from all the other guys that were there, like the Americans and various other people over in the UK, who were saying, "Well, if we could do this with it, if we could do that," and, you know, we were putting all the ideas together, and I was the bloke that was going down to the factory, going up to the factory in Leicester, and you know, like 2 or 3 times a month I was going up there, and they were paying me. They were paying me an hourly rate to go up there as a consultant.
That's perfect. Doesn't get any better, does it?
No, it was great. It was really good, and I got into a great relationship with all the people there. You know, and some of them, of course, are now with the British Drum Company.
Of course, yes, absolutely, yeah. And another fine maker of drums.
Yeah,
indeed.
yeah. I met them all at the NAMM show this year. I got to go out to the NAMM show in Los Angeles.
Brilliant, because I know Nico's new kit was unveiled there, I believe, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, and I just paid Natal a visit. I'd just gone and seen George and all that lot, you know, George Frederick and those guys, and chatted with them. And I was walking back. I'd played a gig on the Thursday outside with John Jorgensen. That's how I got to go there, and I was there for the whole duration of the show. And it was the last day. I think I was paying my respects to various people. I was walking out, and I was walking past the BDC booth, and I could see Nico's kit set up there.
Couldn't miss it.
And there, signing autographs, was Nico.
Right.
And as I walked past, he went, "Oi, mush! Don't you go anywhere." And so I stood around, and he signed a whole bunch of autographs. And then we had a long, long chat, and he introduced me to everybody. And of course, half of the people had actually seen the Versace Signia come off the production line. So, you know,
isn't that lovely though?
We had a long chat about that. And then about 2 or 3 weeks later, I did a gig in Fort Lauderdale. And I don't know, but Nico lives down that way.
Yes, yeah, of course.
And I gave him a call, and so I told him I was doing this gig in Fort Lauderdale. And he said, "Well, you got to come up and have some ribs," because he has a rib restaurant.
Okay, right, all right.
Yeah, he has a barbecue rib restaurant.
Brilliant.
So I went up in a big rainstorm, but I got an Uber, and I went up to see him, and we sat there and we chewed the fat, literally. He got his girls to bring all the stuff in, and we just had this massive meal in front of us, and we're sitting there having our barbecue ribs and chatting about BDC, because he's got a fairly decent stake in the whole company, isn't he? He's I think he helped them financially.
Right. Okay. I'm not sure. I mean, I know Keith and I know Ian quite well, but not many of the others. But there's certainly impressive drums, I have to say. And it's nice to see that you know, obviously Premier famous for being a British company, and I know they're still going in some respect. I don't know, you know. I don't think it's on these shows.
Yeah, but they're a shadow of what they were.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the trouble is it's all being made in the Far East now.
Yeah.
None of it's being made in the UK.
No.
And the only person I know there is Karen. I think Karen Whitelam. So
it's all different. So you're with Natal these days? Is that? Yeah, great sounding drums. You happy with them? They're sounding good?
Yeah, I was one of their earliest signings. I was actually, I think originally I was approached before George Frederick left Premier and joined. But they're very well made. And of course, they're all assembled officially. They're assembled at the Marshall factory. So they are British made.
Yes, of course.
If you like.
Yeah.
And I did the advertising campaign over here, and we actually did "The British Are Coming." I wore a red coat, and I had this big snare. I was holding the snare drum, going, "The British are coming."
Oh, lovely.
You know, I think they had plans to do. I think I had some plans to do more of an advertising campaign this year, and of course everything just went to pieces.
Yeah, of course.
But I've still got to speak to them about that. And the person who actually signed me up was Paul Marshall,
Oh, right, okay.
Jim's son.
Jim's son, yeah. Yeah.
He signed me. And then he kind of left the company. I think he went semi-retired. And they brought George in from Premiere.
He's a great guy.
Great guy, yeah, absolutely. He spent decades trying to steal me over to Pearl. Every time I was at a music fair, I'd be walking past the Pearl stand and there'd be this dapper chap. And he'd go, "Here, Charlie, when are you going to come play a real drum company?" It was, you know, if I was at Frankfurt or the NAMM show or the British Music Fair, he was always there. He was trying to steal me away.
It's a nice compliment, isn't it? It's a nice compliment.
But in the end, he went to Premiere, and then he got Whitey to play Premiere.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. He was there for a good while as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are you up to at the moment? And obviously, there's not people aren't doing much generally at the moment at all, are they? So are you managing to keep busy?
Well, all my gigs went away in early March. I do a lot of these corporate shows where they're multi-artist shows, and I work for 4, 5, 6 artists, and we just do their hits.
Yeah.
Some of these people I know quite well. That gig in Fort Lauderdale I did not long before the lockdown was for 5 different artists. And then in the first week of March, I went down to Orlando to do a yearly show that I do, which is it's a kind of it's an awards ceremony for Holiday Inn Resorts, who are they're the subdivision of Holiday Inn that have all the timeshares.
Okay.
And they do this thing every year where they sink $1 million into a show that we do at the Hard Rock in Orlando.
Right.
And it's a huge, huge show.
Yeah.
This year we had 14 artists all doing 4 or 5 songs. So it's a big deal. I mean, it's a 3-day event. I do the, you know, we go and set up, and then we rehearse all day, and then we do the show date.
So you're the house drummer for all those artists?
All of them.
Wow. Okay. I take it that's a reading gig.
I write my own charts,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I've been woodshedding for the month prior to actually the gig.
Yeah, of course.
But they actually announced straight after the lockdown started, they said, "We're not doing any more corporate gigs this year because we're going to be hurting." Because you know, they're part of the hospitality industry, and the big industry that's been hit is hospitality. You know, airlines and hotels and vacations, and so they've been hit really badly. So I've already lost about 6 gigs through them. Yeah. And I've lost a number of other shows. So I haven't been gigging at all, but I'm still doing online sessions.
That's good.
With the help of, you know, my studio setup, which is across town. And then my V-drum, as I was talking about, my V-drum setup. So here I can do some MIDI sessions for people.
Sure. And
I'm doing several projects. There's a band who had some fame, actually. They're from, where are they from? I'm not sure exactly. They're further north. I'm working for a producer in Yorkshire. And I think they're all up in that region. There's a band called Castanark.
Not familiar with them, but I shall have a look.
Yeah, Castanarc. And I've been doing a new album for them. And we've cut 7 tracks, I think, already.
Yeah.
During this lockdown, because they've been able to do it, and he's been, you know, I've been sending the songs back to them. It's been a lot of fun. They enjoyed a certain amount of success, I think, in the 80s and 90s. So it's a kind of revisiting of their music, and I really like. It's kind of prog rock, atmospheric prog rock. So they're bringing out a new album, and that's going to be a lot of fun. And then I'm working for 2 producers. Both of them are living in Australia, working for them, doing different songs for different artists. So as one of the producers, Steve James, who I worked at Chapel with, we worked with a guy called Phil Ram, who we thought was going to get a deal. He was poised to sign a deal, and it just never happened. And we did about an album and a half's worth of material. and I'm friends with Phil and I'm friends with Steve. And in fact, Phil had a new song, which was kind of about the lockdown. And so we've done a lockdown song. And Steve is putting it together and mixing it over in Australia. So, you know, we're going to get some product out despite all of this stuff going on.
Thank God for technology, eh?
Yeah, I'll say. Yeah, I mean, it's great that I can actually still, you know, record for people.
Mm.
And then I just happened to do a track which apparently is getting a huge amount of airplay. I don't know if you've noticed, but Rolling Stone have been releasing a video of a song each week.
Okay.
About 3 weeks ago, I saw they did a thing with Dave Mason. They did, you know, they did his cover of his own song, "Feeling All Right." You know, the big Joe Cocker hit.
Yes. Yep.
Dave Mason from Traffic wrote the song,
Yeah.
and so he did a remake of it, and I think he got Mick Fleetwood on drums, and he got the Doobie Brothers to play and sing, and who else is on it? God, there was a whole bunch of people. A friend of mine played keyboards on it, but it's worth looking at.
Mm.
But they did a remake of "Feeling All Right," and then a friend of mine happened to phone me up and say, "Look, I need you to play a little bit of drums on this track that we're doing," which is a remake by my friend Jim Wilson and Arlo Guthrie.
All right. Okay.
Of an old song called "Hard Times," with amazing gospel choir on it, and Stanley Clarke on bass.
Oh wow. Okay.
And I'm only in for about a verse and a half, but it's all brushes.
Mm.
And so Rolling Stone released that last week, and it's hundreds of thousands of airplays on YouTube. It's a YouTube stream, and
Have a look.
so I just did that, and that's really that's really taken off. It's snowballed like mad. It's that's quite interesting. So I just happened to be on that, and for me it was a bucket lister because Stanley Clarke was on it. You know, so
Yeah, exactly.
now I can say I played with Stanley Clarke.
Remotely. The technology is just, it's been a total game changer, hasn't it? You know, there's a lot of good come out of the lockdown, as well as, obviously, I know the gigs have gone, there's nothing we can do, but people have adapted, haven't they? And, you know, just got on with it.
Yeah, well, they've already gone back to doing gigs in Nashville, and then we've had a big spike. So, you know.
Oh, really?
A number of my friends were back playing regular gigs. A couple of people I cycle with, and then they said that you know, the spike happened, and they all shut the whole area down. You know, Broadway, which is where all the clubs and pubs are.
Yeah.
But they tried to reopen it, and now they're not allowed to open again for a while.
Yeah, it's going to be.
They blew it. They did it too early, you know.
Yeah. It's going to be a slow burner, this one, isn't it? I think.
They weren't patient enough. You know, they probably could have, if they'd lasted properly with proper lockdown for 4 months, we probably could have eradicated it. But as it was, you know, a number of people, all these stupid anti-maskers here, who just, I don't understand the mentality. I mean, I personally know at least 2 people in the UK who died from COVID-19.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, it's serious, isn't it? It's no, you know.
It is. I
Not,
mean,
not
the thing about it is, yeah, I mean, for most of the people, the symptoms are similar to flu, but unfortunately, there are a couple of, there's a small percentage of people who basically will get these spontaneous blood clots in the lungs and in the body, and they die from blood clots. They're basically the blood clots spontaneously.
Damn.
Both my friends died, but they autopsied them. They died from breathing difficulties. One of them died in less than 24 hours.
Dear me, that's miserable, isn't it? That's horrible.
The ambulance, by the time the ambulance was called, he was dead.
Dear me.
And they autopsied him, you know, gave an autopsy afterwards, and he had hundreds of blood clots in his lungs.
Dear me. Well, Well, look, we can't finish on that note. That's
No.
for certain. But I've got one more question for you. They've been getting some great viewing numbers, these videos. From a drummer who's done everything, what advice would you give to some youngsters coming through these days, you know, with it all ahead of them? What would you, if you had a few words of advice, what would it be?
Um, well, Muff Winwood once said to me, um, this was regarding doing session work, and you know, people start in the industry and they start saying that they start with a particular style in mind. Okay, they think, oh, I'm going to be a heavy rock drummer, or I'm going to be death metal, or you know. But Muff said to me, he said, never turn anything down. And it's funny because, you know, in the mid 80s, I got a phone call from a friend of a friend who had a country band, and I'd never played country. And this guy had a problem. He was playing about 2 miles away from me at the Red Lion in Brentford. I lived in Chiswick.
I've played in the Red Lion in Brentford a long time ago.
And he said, listen, he said, my drummer's broken down on the other side of London, and I've been given your phone number. Would you come out and do a gig with me? It's country and western. And I said, I don't play country. And this guy, Tony Griffin, said to me, he said, Charlie, I'll point you through everything. Don't worry about it. I know you can do this. Come on, come and do this. And I went and did the gig, and he basically just saw me. And it was all old classic country, which they play here. It was all recorded here in Nashville. You know? So I did this gig, and it was the start of a long relationship. And he always had a great band. Start of a long relationship, playing pubs and clubs and some of the Irish clubs in northwest London, you know, Harlesden, Willesden, the Mean Fiddler, we played a number of times. Yeah. And it was a really good call. And I wasn't a country drummer, but the funny thing is, it gave me a kind of grounding. So Muff Winwood saying, never turn anything down, no matter what. If you get if you get an offer from somebody, don't turn it down. Don't think, oh, this is not my style of music. You know, you're a thrash metal drummer, and somebody says, hey, I've got this jazz gig next week. Would you like to come and do it? Do it. You're going to lose. Yeah. You know, learn a different style. It's going to add to whatever you do. That would be my advice. Never turn anything down.
I think that seems like solid advice to me. And I don't think you're the only one that said that. So it seems a common theme, which is an obvious one really, isn't it? But absolutely.
Well, the thing about it is, it's all very well to put yourself in a particular genre or style, like cubbyhole yourself. But if you are wanting to be a serious musician and earn a living at it, then you're going to have to play different styles.
Yeah. Including many you don't like, perhaps. Or not comfortable.
Yeah, possibly, or they may not be your cup of tea, but you know, yeah, that's if somebody's going to pay you a couple of £100 to do a session or a gig, do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, Charlie, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute treat talking to you, and I mean that. I know everyone's going to enjoy this, so I guess it must be about 3 o'clock in the afternoon there at the moment. It's just going
after 3 p.m.
It's just going dark here in the UK, so it's. I really appreciate it. I really do. It's been fantastic talking to you.
You're very welcome.
Thanks for giving your time, and I'll see you next time. Thank you, Charlie. Bye bye. Bye bye.